Why did Jez's attitude change so drastically before and after, and what was his real purpose? Hit subscribe to join us on this eerie journey. We got out of the tent again and asked if anybody was there, but again there was no one around and the sound had stopped instantly. The footsteps around the tent continued for quite some time, and we didn't sleep. As soon as the sun came up, we packed up our things, got off the trail and hiked to the nearest village, got a cab to the nearest town, and we made our way home. We've never been able to find a convincing explanation of what could have been causing the sound of the footsteps that night, and my friend has since become a full-fledged missing person paranormal and conspiracy enthusiast. This was a few years ago in my old house around Halloween. One day, I, a 43-year-old male, was home alone in my house. I have a wife, 3 kids and a dog. I'm in my basement cutting wood and working when all of a sudden I hear thumping on the ceiling above me, the first level floor. It's rhythmic and almost perfectly in beat. I'm a handyman and do a lot of my own fixing and know the usual sound houses make. This was not usual. I start to follow the thumping around the first floor. It's as if someone or something is walking around. I call out my wife's name. No answer. My kids no answer, just soft moaning. That is getting louder with the thumps. My dog is with me in the basement, and following the sound with me with his tail straight up completely silent. This was weird too, because I have a very loud and sort of jumpy dog. I then slowly follow the thumping to the steps and I hear a weak old woman's voice calling for Jimmy. Not my name, but my name does start with AJ over and over, ignoring my hellos. She keeps walking around my first floor calling out, moaning and thumping. I grab my dog by the collar and leave out the basement door and walk around the outside of my house. It's worth noting too that I've had a lot of weird supernatural things happen in my life, especially around Halloween, for some weird reason, but I could feel that this was different, very different. I go up the street and there's a younger couple calling out for someone. Let's say Nancy, for the sake of this. I go up to them and say, "Are you Jimmy?" The young guy looks at me with simultaneous relief and confusion across his face. He tells me that's his dad's name, but he passed years ago. Turns out Nancy was his mom with some kind of mental issue. She snuck out of her house up the road. Her family lived in my house before. We didn't know that, and she was having some kind of an episode, went looking for her husband in her home. Oh, and also she had a wooden leg. I don't know the story, but that was the thumping. We got her home safely and I also double-checked my doors from that point on, but I'm actually really glad that I didn't go up there, because who knows how she might have reacted with me, a stranger allegedly being in her house. So I genuinely have no clue why I haven't said anything about this yet, considering so much weird stuff happens in my life. But this was probably one of the creepiest encounters that I've ever had, and I feel lucky that I walked away. So one summer night a few years ago, I was out for a drive with a friend. We decided to make a little late-night stop in a nearby waterfall for a little bit of a smoke sesh, since it was always super dead and really peaceful in the evenings. This specific time, I didn't make it anywhere near the waterfall, but as we were getting out of the car, I, a 19-year-old female at the time, really had to pee now. I used to go to this waterfall very often, and I know that area like the back of my hand, even in the dark. So I went and found a spot where it was too dark for me to see more than maybe 2 feet in front of me. I tried to stay as close to the forest exit as possible, without being seen by a semi-busy road the entire time I was up there. I absolutely know that I was being watched, but very closely. I ended up getting out of there as fast as I possibly could, jumping in the car, and locking the doors that entire time. I could feel someone's eyes digging into me, like daggers, though I was genuinely ready to be grabbed. What confirmed I was definitely being watched happened when I got back to the car, and I saw a kid run across the street directly up to where I was. He came from nowhere to a literal cliff on one side and hence the waterfall, and I could genuinely only describe him as the little boy from The Jungle Book clothing and all. I get majorly weird vibes every time that I go there now that I've never ever got before. It still has a weird feeling in the day, and I genuinely don't know how this happened so quickly here. A kid would have had to have scaled a large cliff and MVE moved at a super high speed. I'm going with the most logical explanation in my city, which is people living in the woods, with possible ulterior motives, but at this point I'm not ruling anything out. This was by far the weirdest and creepiest encounter that I've had in a long time, that I recall, and it has honestly just kind of stuck with me. I hate going to this waterfall now, which absolutely sucks, because it's so close to my house and it's really gorgeous, but I don't know. I just get the weirdest vibes when I go there now also, just before anything else is said. I know how stupid this was, but I was 19 and I'm stubborn and all, and so nothing would have talked me out of peeing in a place where I need a flashlight. Safe to say, though, that I have not been back to that part of the park, since it has taken me many years to tell this story, out of both fear and embarrassment, but I share this today as more than simple therapy for myself, but also as a warning to all people. Be careful who you might meet on social media. So in 2018, my ex-husband and I were at the end of a very tumultuous marriage. He and I had been polyamorous for about 3 years before I met this guy. His name was Jez. I met Jez on OkCupid. I was 28 and he was 42. We hit it off very quickly. After a few weeks of talking, I agreed to meet up with him at a restaurant close to my house. We sat and talked for a few hours before I invited him over to meet my husband. Things went very well too, and they seemed to get along, so Jez and I started dating. This guy too completely swept me off my feet. Jez was sweet and caring. He enthusiastically listened to every little thing of my mind, engaged and validated me over and over again. He absolutely revered me for my strength and wisdom. He practically worshipped me for all that I was and all that I was becoming. He showered me with gifts, flowers and random good deeds, just to make me feel safe, wanted and cared for. I had never been in a relationship that felt quite like that. It was wonderful. It was as though we had been looking for each other for years. After the first few weeks, we had a meltdown over my polyamorous nature. He pulled the plug because he said that he was already falling for me and couldn't handle sharing me. I stood my ground and accepted this boundary, and the fact that I would have to let him go. I left that night sad but confident that I had done the right thing for the both of us. That next week he sent me flowers and a card to my workplace, begging for another chance and reassuring me that he would rather try than not and end up regretting it. And even though it was scary, he wanted to take his journey with me. So we continued dating and it was really wonderful. Long nights we spent awake, talking, sharing, laughing, love-making and planning. We went places and did things that I'd always wanted to do. Then, in the deepest, most intimate moments, when we would just sit in silence, he would grip my hand to his face in solidarity and astonishment, asking where I've been all this time. Our time together was effortless. We fit together like puzzle pieces. By August of 2018 my marriage had ended, and by no fault of Jazz's, and by October my husband had moved out. I was in a lease at the time and knew that I couldn't afford the place on my own, so finding a roommate was essential. I had no support system to fall back on. Nor did anyone else that I know need a place at the time, so Jez offered to move in. Even then I was hesitant. I mean, we'd only been together about 4 months, and I knew everything always changes when you move in with a partner. But despite my hesitation, I agreed. I mean, he was wonderful to me, so how bad could it be? But boy, I was not prepared for the change that was to come. It was literally like night and day. Jez suddenly became a different person. He was extremely controlling, jealous and lazy. Nothing like the person that I thought I'd met, and the way that he treated me progressively got worse and worse. Hanging out with friends became a burden, if not impossible, because he would blow up my phone, guilting me about leaving him alone, or not involving him in some way. Yet when I tried to, it was also treated as a burden and inconvenience, as he would huff and puff his way through even the concept of leaving space for anyone but ourselves. In December of 2018, we attended my work Christmas party. I'd given him the option whether he wanted to go or not. It was really neither here nor there for me, especially because I had already learned that he really didn't do well if he felt pressured into social situations. But I opened the invitation to him, because he had expressed to me over and over that it was important for him that he was involved in my social life for the full month he knew about it. He insisted that he wasn't going. I took it as him being introverted and didn't push the issue. I let him know that I would make sure that he felt welcomed if he decided to go, but not to feel obligated. So I was surprised when he changed his mind at the last minute and insisted on going, and even more stunned when we went, and he actively acted as though he didn't want to be there. Everyone there was incredibly welcoming and included him in the festivities and conversation. However, he still practically grumbled the entire night about the whole thing, mumbling insults and critiquing every little part of the party under his breath, as though being there was absolutely awful to have to endure. No one really seemed to notice the low whispering insults and gripes. At one point, after a couple of glasses of wine, my direct manager leaned into JZ and started praising him. She and I were very close. Therefore she was intimately familiar with what I had gone through with my ex-husband. "I'm so happy she's with you." She bleated through wine. "Happy? You have been absolutely transformative for her. It's so nice to see her finally happy and appreciate it without missing a beat." Jez grimaced at the comment and quickly snapped back. "You don't know me." I honestly didn't believe my ears. It was one of those moments where time sort of stops, and you just know that you couldn't have heard that correctly. I sat brewing on it for a minute before another light-hearted interaction with Jez prompted him to suddenly snap at me through gritted teeth. "Stop it." This triggered me and I lost it. I pulled him outside and asked him what the problem was. I called out his behavior and told him that if he was going to act that way, then he could just leave, that if he didn't want to be there, he should have stayed home. He ended up sort of giving a half apology, and we went back inside and finished the party. I remember the drive home that night, staring out of the dark window at nothing in particular in worried silence. "I might have messed up" was my only thought through the entire drive. This all started out slow, of course, like waving me away or invalidating my experiences and ideas due to my age that I was just dramatizing my experiences, because I was young, etc. The man who 6 months prior had validated me my trauma and experiences to the ends of the earth. Now, every time I started a story or tried to share anything, even trying to plan out meals for the week, he would openly show annoyance, as though I was violating his time and attention before I knew it. He was snapping at me over every little thing. If I asked how his day was or talked about my day, he would aggressively shut it down. "Why do you always ask me that? I don't want to talk shop at home. I really don't care about your work. It's work." Before I knew it, I couldn't even bring him a plate of breakfast without being snapped at. It was almost as though he was sort of, I don't know, like testing me. When Jez and I first started dating, he flat out refused to talk about most of all of his exes. He refused to name them or discuss any of the issues or lessons learned. They didn't matter. He claimed they weren't in his life for a reason. It was the same reasoning he also used in reference to my more recent exes. Talking about them, including my own ex-husband, may as well have become off limits. Anytime I brought up either of our exes, he would become incredibly agitated, belittling and, just overall, very aggressive. I took this as both an age gap issue, as I have a tendency to dwell, as well as insecurity and a threat to the life that we were trying to build. However, after he moved in and this hot-button topic had been established several times, he would bring up his exes and how they looked, telling me on more than one occasion that he would have never dated me back in the day, and that I was lucky he lowered his standards. I didn't even really know what to say to this. To be honest, I would laugh it off and shove it in my back pocket, noted, I guess. He then started bringing up my looks and accusing me of catfishing him. I had stopped taking care of myself due to the isolation, and had also put on some weight, so most of the clothes that I had once felt great in no longer fit. And since Jez had also been dishonest with me about his financial position, he was always needing extra money here and there, leaving me broke almost all of the time. A horrible tragedy happened that following summer, while Jez and I were together. I received notice that a good friend I went to art school with actually deleted himself while tripping on LSD. That whole class was devastated. He was without contest the best photographer of our class, and one of the most kind-hearted individuals that I'd ever had the pleasure of knowing. Also, as someone who was familiar with LSD, I was rocked. Jez, however, was far from supportive. He pretty much immediately shrugged it off, as that's life. I guess that's what you get when you mess around with LSD. I was baffled at such an unsympathetic response, and even more later when Jez started to interrogate me about my relationship with this guy, asking the last time it was that I had even talked to this friend. You don't even know this guy anymore. Who cares? I broke up with him the first time, after he called me at work raging. I was busy, so I wasn't able to answer right away, but once I was finally able to answer, I was met with intense anger. It was storming and one of my dogs was having an anxiety attack due to the storm and separation anxiety. This wasn't the first time, and he was well aware of what she needed in those moments. Why aren't you answering my calls? You answer when I call you. I don't care where you are. He went on for a few minutes, calling me a terrible girlfriend and laying into me over my sudden distance and lack of communication while I was at work. At this point, though, I was done and I just lost it. I tore into him over everything, especially causing problems for me at work, that being in my life is a privilege, and that if he's going to wake up every day acting like he hates me, then I don't know what on earth he's even doing with me. I told him that I expected him to get his things and leave. He was always threatening to go back to his old roommates, where there was still a room. I didn't want him there anymore. When I got home and we could coordinate times for him to come and get the rest, he flatly refused, suddenly victimizing himself, claiming that he had nowhere to go. How dare you make me fall in love with you? How dare you take me to your father and then dump me? My manager and her husband ended up following me home that evening because she was actually concerned for my safety and had offered to let me stay with her for a few days. I will never forget the scene that I walked into, though it was like Theon Greyjoy begging for his life. My boss stood next to me, watching as this 42-year-old man crawled on his knees before me, begging for mercy and communication, at one point, wrapping his arms around my legs, crying into them. I can't believe this is happening. She's the love of my life. You know that, he cried to my boss. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. This was the antithesis of the heartless person that I'd been spending my days with. I shook him off and went to the back of the house, gathering enough of my things to get me through the next few days, as well as any and all valuables that I could think of. It did take a few days, but after about a week, Jez started blowing up my phone, apology after apology. Suddenly he was the man that I met again, full of humility and self-awareness. He acknowledged the awful way that he had treated me and sent me walls and walls of well-thought-out messages, psychoanalyzing his own behavior, where it comes from and the ways that he knows it needs to be changed. And so I took him back like a dumb and desperate girl. I took him back. It wasn't long into the second round, though, that he started to guilt me over the breakup. My panic had damaged his relationship with people in my life, and he made sure that I knew that it was my responsibility to fix. It wasn't long after this that my car ended up breaking down at a gas station close to home. There was a very nice couple in the vehicle next to me that came to my rescue and checked things out under my hood. The gentleman turned out to be a mechanic for a living, so he had a pretty good theory about what could potentially be going on by this time. I had already attempted to contact Jez to let him know what was going on and where I was, and it wasn't long until he got off work, and so he told me to sit tight, and he would be there shortly. Meanwhile, this sweet couple stayed put and kept me company while I waited. Jez barreled in about maybe 15 minutes later, completely ignoring the couple that had helped me touching base. The gentleman handed me a slip of paper with a name and a phone number on it, reviewing what he thought was going on with my car. Before Jez butted in cutting him off, saying I said she's fine. He snapped. I could see the woman out of the corner of my eye slink away at this comment and get into the passenger seat of their car. I could feel the sudden tension, like maybe she's been there before. The gentleman didn't move and shifted his attention to me. As Jez walked into the store, I could see that he was clearly concerned. You okay? He asked in a low, almost whisper. You don't have to answer that, but if you need anything. He looked down at the number in my hand and nodded to it seriously. With that, he got into the driver's seat of his car and he drove away. I've thought about that couple countless times since that night, but everything went right back to the way that it was before, as though the initial breakup never even happened. The same eggshells, the same belittling, if anything. It was worse, in fact, because I had permanently damaged our relationship. If I had just not been so dramatic, if I didn't run away from everything, then maybe he wouldn't have to work so hard for respect in my life. One night we got into an argument. I don't really even remember what it was about, but I had to be up early for work the next morning, so I paused the argument in order to get some sleep. When I went to lay down, I heard the TV on. I have a sound bar, so the volume can get pretty loud. Jaz proceeded to turn the volume up and up and up, far past any volume that I ever pushed those same speakers to, even for parties. The very walls were reverberating with the sound of the TV at astronomical volumes. Jez then started laughing hysterically. It was a laughter manic, with anger, as though something might be funny on TV, but he might also jump through a window. Right now I remember laying in bed absolutely horrified at what was happening. I mean, I knew things had gotten bad, but this now. I was scared. I got out of bed and asked him to turn it down, to which he responded scoffing. I'll watch TV if I want to, and turned it up even louder. To be honest, it was at this point that it suddenly felt a bit like a horror movie. I started crying, begging him to please just let me sleep, and he started mocking me and calling me names for crying, like poor baby is crying again. That you're hard, isn't it, crying? This caused the fight to start again, and he started screaming at me. Followed me to my bedroom, where he suddenly punched a door not 2 inches from my head. His eyes were suddenly black too, and he looked me in the eye, sending the clear, unsympathetic and hostile message. That was a warning, and next time he wouldn't miss. My whole system had shut down at this point and I sunk to the floor in a panic attack. My ex-husband had issues with violence. Jez knew that all of our rentals prior to that one had holes and walls and doors peppered throughout our unit due to my ex-husband's inability to handle his emotions. But he never hit me or even came close to it. I crumbled to the ground feeling powerless, trapped and afraid as my thoughts continued to race. He continued to berate and mock my panicked state. Most of our argument from that night was a blur, to be honest, but ended abruptly once he threatened to put my social security number on the dark web. At this point, all that was left for me to do was fight, and I blacked out, went ballistic, screaming at him to get out. I felt rabid, dangerous as I screamed like a banshee for him to leave my home. It was over and I was ending it that second. I contacted my landlord and explained what had been going on. Jez would also end up contacting her, weaving his own tale that I was moving out and tried to have the lease transferred into his name. Luckily, since I was several steps ahead of him, my landlord didn't fall for it and contacted me immediately. She even personally came and changed my locks for me, gave me the personal contact of a police officer close by in case he showed up again, and took half off my rent for the next month. I am forever grateful to her for these simple acts of kindness that were above and beyond anything that I would ever expect from a landlord. It truly was a kind thing to do, but it took weeks for him to stop messaging me. The only reason why I didn't block him was out of fear that he would show up at my house. Although I had contacts for protection, I knew that I would rather get a daily apology video than have to deal with him on my doorstep. So they persisted for a while. The same act from before, the love, bumming the promises, grasping at straws, trying to find the weak spot where I would let him back in, but this time I ignored it. It continued for weeks before he finally gave up. He bowed out gracefully, stating boldly that he will always love me. I left him on read. The illusion was destroyed. At this point, it took me several years to pick up the pieces. If my divorce wasn't enough, then this definitely made me lose trust in myself. But to be honest, I still don't really understand what the end game was. In fact, in one of our last discussions, I asked him desperately what happened to the guy that I fell in love with. Jez looked me dead in the eye, smirked really creepily, and said that guy doesn't exist. I told you what I had to tell you in order to get you away from your husband. You're just stupid and fell for it. So before I start retelling this particular experience, I want to preface it by giving my reason for sharing it. So this happened some years back, and I've always been quick to just kind of push it off and try to forget about it. But a conversation that I had recently inspired me to write my story out, so people with more experience of the paranormal or supernatural phenomena might tell me what I witnessed. If anything, this all takes place in northwestern Montana. During the late autumn of 2009, when I was 17, I moved out of my parents' and in with a co-worker, who I'll call John, in his trailer. We got along well at work, and we'd been part of the same weekly D&D group for a while. It was actually one of the better roommate situations I've ever had in terms of compatibility, and we became close friends during this time as well. We were roommates until shortly after I turned 18, and some personal stuff happened with my family, and I ended up moving back in with them for a while at least, so I could help them cover some bills. It took about 3 months for that situation to stabilize, and I called this friend up about moving back out there, and this was the first time I remember feeling like something was off, though it has been so long that I can't remember the details of the conversation. Just a sense of wrongness that lingered for a while after I'd hung up the phone. The end result, though, was that I was welcome to move back in, which I expected. I waited for a day off, and another friend, who I'll call Dave, came to help me move. Dave was another D&D power from a different group, and we were figuring that we'd show up and talk into my on-shot session or something. So we loaded up all my stuff, and we drove out there, and it was such a nightmare. But from the very moment that John opened that door, everything was just wrong. I won't say John was a clean freak, but he tried to maintain his space, and he'd always insisted that we clean up for company. When I was living with him, and I stood there open-mouthed to see the thick layer of dust that just coated nearly everything, and the longer I looked around the worse it got. There was a half-eaten plate of food turned to mold just sitting on the table. Both things in the kitchen were similarly moldy, and the air in the trailer just stank even beyond what I'd expect for some moldy dishes. I was extremely taken back by the state of the trailer, but the state of my friend was even more shocking. He worked at a bank and he'd always kept himself clean, but now he just looked like a complete wreck. He lost weight. His skin had unhealthy waxy looks to it. His hair was overgrown and greasy, and his body odor was just terrible. His smell was the first thing that made me think that there's something really off about this situation. I've been playing D&D and doing other nerd stuff for a long time, and I'm sorry to say that a lot of nerds don't have the best hygiene practices. But short story is that I've been in the presence of some pretty pungent body odor in my life, and this was not like that. It was almost the sickly sweet smell of something dead, but not quite. I've never really smelled anything exactly like it before or even since. At this point during the encounter, I'm at a general level of unease and I didn't have any desire to go into the trailer. But John invites us and not wanting to be rude, I go in. At this point I'm thinking that something crazy happened while I was away. John wasn't dating anyone, so I'd figured that this was a depression resulting from heartbreak or something, and we kept in touch. Okay, after I first moved out and even when that fell off a bit, I still heard from our mutual friends about the D and sessions that he was attending. So this was all just really weird. Regardless though, despite having not heard anything about it, obviously something had happened. So standing there in this dusty living room, with Dave, who was shooting me sideways looks the entire time. I asked John if everything is all right. After a full 3 seconds of silence, he assures me that everything is fine, just that he doesn't try to explain the state of his house or anything, and Yet he goes, "You guys can crash out here," and just heads off to the back of the house. I'd always known him to be a diligent host, so this was odd to say the least, and although basically nothing was going as I expected or remembered up to this point, him ditching us in the living room of his nasty house was probably the least weird thing. And now comes the part where I'm pretty glad that Dave was there to me. This nasty trailer was my home. I'd lived there for more than a year before my 3-month visit to my parents, and I had a sense of belonging in the place, which I think made me oblivious to things that were obvious to Dave. Despite the state of things and being left alone by my friend, I hadn't made any changes to the plan of living there. I had set my stuff down and started getting ready to do some cleaning, but Dave stopped me and started pointing out things that I hadn't noticed up to this point. The layer of dust was even and undisturbed across the entire living room and kitchen area, except for the thin track from the front door to the hallway leading to the back of the trailer, whispering to me. Dave says nothing in here has been used for a long time, and really looking around I begin to realize that he's right. The TV, the computer, the couch and the chairs, the dining table with its rotten food. He hasn't so much as laid a hand on any of it for a month or possibly longer. Dave, almost as if he's sneaking, walks quietly into the kitchen to inspect the fridge. He points out a few thick patches of dust on the flatter surfaces of the fridge, but it's harder to tell. Here the fridge's metal handle did have some dust, but it wasn't collected. Stepping past Dave, I reach out with one finger, and I pull the fridge open, and was gagging before I'd even opened the door enough to trigger the interior light, throwing my arm across my face and burying my nose in the crook of my elbow. I open the fridge about halfway, and it's just top to bottom with rotten food. I step back after a second, turning away and trying to suppress my urge to vomit. After I take a moment to collect myself, Dave draws my attention to a half-gallon of milk that he pulled out of the fridge, indicating that it had expired 3 weeks prior. Personally, I just wanted him to put everything back and close the fridge. More or less done playing dust detective. I basically shug off everything up to this point, clear some dust from the couch, and get my laptop out and connect to the Wi-Fi. But we'd always paid for the best internet available. But after a while Dave joins me, and we played World of Warcraft for a bit. Eventually he tells me that he'll hang out for tonight, because I'm his right, and taking him back to his place and driving back to the trailer was a 90-minute round trip, to be clear. I would have taken him home anyway. I wouldn't blame anyone for wanting to hang out in a room with a giant stack of moldy dishes in the sink and a fridge full of rotten food. But we play games on the computer for the next few hours, and John just never made a noise. At one point, Dave asked me where the bathroom was, and I told him that it was at the far end of the hallway next to John's bedroom. A low level of unease had been present since John first entered the door, and was becoming more apparent the longer that we stayed. Normally I don't walk with my friends to the bathroom, but it seemed like the right thing to do at the time. So away let Dave down the hallway, flipping on the hallway light, as we go and covering my fingers in the dust from the switch. At this point I must admit that I was actually starting to get annoyed with everything. I don't normally have bad seasonal allergies, but all the dust that we've been stirring up had my nose itchy and half plugged. So on my way back down the hallway, I think to myself that I'm going to point Dave into the bathroom and knock on John's bedroom door and confront him about the condition of the house. But halfway down the hallway I realized that a hole in the floor outside the bathroom door, a jagged edge hole through which you can clearly see the dirt and the cobwebs and shredded black plastic that used to cover insulation. I sigh exasperated now with the weirdness. I point Dave into the bathroom, and I walk to the end of the hallway where John's room is. I wonder briefly if he's actually asleep, as there's no light coming from under his door. The sun was setting, but it's getting dark pretty early this time of year. Annoyed, I knocked loudly and after a few seconds I heard a grunt from inside the room. I pop the door open and flip on the light, and this is the point in time where it really starts to sink in for me how wrong this experience felt. I take in the room at a glance, and it's much the same state as the rest of the house, dust everywhere, except for the track from the door to the nearest side of the bed. The bed itself was terrible. The blankets and pillows were stained, a deep yellow, almost black in places, and John just laid on his bed with a 1,000-yard stare turned on the ceiling. I instantly forget entirely why I even came to talk to John, because looking directly at him, I felt the beginnings of what I can only describe as a profound fear, which even at the time seemed like an odd feeling to have. In that situation, my sickly-looking, clearly depressed friend laying on his disgusting bed, paying no attention to me at all. I mean, it was weird that I felt so scared. John was not an intimidating guy, short, kind of chubby and baby-faced, but in my gut I was just terrified of him. I mumbled something about how I'd come to say good night, and turned off the light, and I shut the door. I turned around to find Dave kneeling by the hole in the floor, which, as I write this, makes me wonder how long I stood in the doorway to John's room, for if I had to estimate from where I left Dave to say good night to John, only 15 seconds or so collapsed, but he was already out of the bathroom, which was weird as I approached. Dave points at the edge of the hall and tells me the wood along the edge is twisted upward, as if the hole was made from below this part. I wish I could confirm to be true. I'm including it in my retelling of events, because Dave did say it to me, but I did not take the time to inspect the edge of the hall myself, because right then I was just at war with my own sense of fear that being in John's presence had sparked. I just nodded to Dave and I said we should get back to the living room. Fast forwarding a bit now, I kind of came to my senses once we were back in the living room area, and I had reopened my laptop. My sudden intense fear of John eased off, and we played a few games for a few more hours before Dave said that he wanted to rest his eyes, but we shut everything down. I chilled out in a recliner, and Dave laid down on the couch positions so that he could look down the hallway. I was just too uneasy to sleep over all that night, and after looking into John's room, I had determined that I wouldn't be living here after all, as much as I didn't really like living with my parents anymore. It was preferable to whatever John had going on here quietly. I told Dave that everything was just all wrong and explained a bit how John, as I knew him, would never let anything get to this point. We weighed out the possibilities: a psychotic break or maybe drugs. It occurred to me more recently that I should have considered the fact that he might have been seriously ill. Even these are all still possible explanations to this strange behavior, but my gut tells me that none of these are the answer. After a while, we lapse into silence, and at this point I'm just waiting for the sun to come up, really starting to wonder why we haven't left already. When Dave motions with his hand to get my attention, he kind of points towards the hallway, and I turned my head slowly in the recliner to look, and after perhaps 15 or so seconds of just staring hard into the darkened hallway, I hear a slight creak from the darkness. A little while, and a few creaks later, I see John's dark and silhouette just standing just inside the hallway at the edge of the kitchen, and that deep sense of fear just started to build in me again. The only thing I can compare it to is once when out hiking alone, I ran right into a fairly decent-sized bear, going the opposite way on the trail. I had bear spray on me, which I didn't end up using at the time. But it was a terrifying experience, and if I'm being honest, I've never really enjoyed hiking much since then. Just standing across from that monster of a bear with nothing between us awakened a terror in me so deep-seated that recalling the memory still gives me goosebumps. Alternatively, I've been face to face with a lot of crazy people and felt no such terror before. I wasn't fearless when trying to avoid a knife-wielding transient, shouting gibberish at me, but it was a human threat. If that makes sense. I realize that I've segued pretty hard for my retelling of events, but I feel making this clear is paramount, because seeing John just lurking in the darkness of that hallway inspired in me a state of fear so powerful that I feel I have no choice but to look for unconventional answers as to what happened to my friend, because the only thing comparable to that God feeling of dread that my short, chubby babyface friend created in me was the time that I ran into one of the largest terrestrial predators on the planet by myself on his home turf, far and away from any help, armed with nothing but a can of bee spray. There was something wrong and dangerous going on that I can't justify analytically, but my instincts told me that I was in danger in a way that I'd never been prepared for. But to fast forward to the end of this story, but we lay there in silence while he looked in the hallway for hours. When I questioned Dave recently, he tells me that it was at least 2 hours that JN just stood there, allegedly just staring right at us. Eventually he crept back down the hallway to his bedroom, and quietly and quickly we just got our stuff together, and we snuck out to my car and we left. I did a little bit of a follow-up with their mutual friends afterwards, but got the same story from all of them. One day he just stopped coming around, and later I heard from someone who spoke to his parents that he called them and said that he was leaving town, and no one that I know has seen or heard from him. Since I've mostly tried to forget that it all happened for a while, I'd have panic attacks. When I thought about it, I realized that nothing overtly paranormal took place, but my gut tells me that something well out of the ordinary was taking place in that spot. If anyone has any insights, I'd be happy to hear it, and if you need any more details too, I'll answer questions to the best of my ability, and if you don't believe me, I don't blame you. This morning at around 5 or 6, I woke up because I heard what sounded like feet shuffling on my carpet, and I thought that it was my cat. But when I opened my eyes, I could vaguely see that was moving really unnaturally, like its arms were kind of dangling in its sides, and it had a bounciness in its step. It walked in front of me, and then leaned to the side and tilted its head sideways like it was observing me. I was a little scared, but my room was really dark, so I just figured my eyes were playing tricks on me. So I closed my eyes and I told myself that I'm fine and don't open them. But I did, and the figure was still there. I quickly closed them again, and this time I didn't open them, but I kind of felt a weight on my mess, like it was getting on my bed to get a closer look at me. I freaked out and I pulled my blanket over my face. Then I felt the way to leave my bed, but I still didn't remove my blanket. Eventually I heard my mom leave her room to use the toilet, and I finally got brave enough to look back at the figure, but by then it was gone. I know for a fact that it wasn't a dream, because I could feel my heart beating and my mind was conscious, and I was aware of my surroundings. I would not have been alarmed by this at all if it weren't for the fact that I could actually hear feet moving across my carpet, and I could feel some sort of weight on my bed, like my eyes tricked me all the time. I'll admit that, but not my ears and never my sense of weight, and definitely never all three together. I couldn't see much of the figure, but I could tell that it had long arms, greyish skin and large black eyes. It had a really tiny mouth that hung open, almost as if it was dumbfounded by what it was seeing, like it had never seen a person before or something. I don't directly believe in the supernatural, but I do believe that there's a lot about our world that we as humans just don't know. And who knows, somewhere in that vast expanse of abstract ideas that we are not aware of just yet. There could be an explanation for what I saw and heard and felt, but boy, I wish I hadn't heard or felt anything, because then I could have just passed this off as my eyes and brain just making things up anyway. I'm sleeping with all my lights on tonight, and I hope that it doesn't come back. When I was in high school, rumors flattered out clicks. I mean, first of all it's Louisiana, so we have a cultural tendency to be a bit more superstitious. Second of all, I'm from an area in town where many tragedies have taken place. We had a serial killer who used the RR tracks in our town to stalk his victims. I live in the cotton fields and well, we all know what took place there. A young lady was murdered up the street by the swampy lake that I enjoyed fishing at. I'm youngish and a female, by the way, so I kind of kept an eye out, but I never saw anything until this, so I grew up with guys, as there were very few females in our area, and my friend Kyle and I were going down a very secluded highway, but we had a strange feeling because this particular highway had a bit of a past. It ran parallel to the tracks used by said serial killer, Rafael Ramirez. Many people use the stretch of road to race completely isolated. It's dark, a bit spooky and on a stretch that leads to nowhere really. It had a history, though, of bad road conditions and tragic accidents as well. Kyle and I had a weird feeling that night, and there was nothing to see for miles, just a 2-lane highway in the boonies. We are jamming out and going along, really not trying to focus on this strange feeling when a car approaches, and it's almost as if it was in slow motion. The dome light was on. So we were curious. I mean, why is someone driving down this road at this time of night with their dome light on? Strange, but I have a look in her. When the car gets close and is about to pass us the opposite way, we realize that it's a classic 1970s, I think, a Nova. It surely wasn't from our day and age, and this piqued our interest even more, as we were really into cars. As the car passed, the female in the passenger side was leaning towards the male driver. She was smiling and I actually commented about how cute that was. They looked like they were really enjoying themselves, maybe flirting, and when I went to look back, there was just nothing, no tail lights, no car, no people. There was nowhere to turn. It was just a straight highway, but they had just vanished. It happened just so quickly, and my friend and I said nothing for quite some time after my initial reaction. That is, but then we started talking and there have been quite a few fatal wrecks on that stretch of road. I say to him, did you notice a hairstyle, because it looked way outdated. I don't really know what to make of this. I don't want to admit that we saw a couple who maybe passed away following a crash in the 70s, but it seems like that's what the hell happened. I've done my research too, and I can't find a thing about anything specific, at least no details on the car, or a young couple. All I have is hearsay from locals, and I will say this, though they were smiling, so I guess I can take some comfort in that I forgot that this ever happened to me until a few weeks ago, when a few friends and I were talking about scary things from our childhoods. One of my friends mentioned feeling like she was about to be kidnapped, and this jogged my memory and reminded me of an event that happened when I was around 7 or 8. Here's a little backstory, though. So I grew up in a very small town with virtually no crime. Everyone knew everyone. My neighborhood was far away from any major roads or highways, and my town was never very busy, except for on the weekends, due to it being a kind of small tourist attraction. As a result, even my protective parents felt comfortable letting me ride my bike over to my friend's house, which was only about a block away. One day, I was coming back from my friend's house after spending nearly the entire day there, and I was directly next to my driveway, when I saw a car driving towards me from the end of the road. I noticed that it was on the wrong side of the street, and as a result I stopped my bike and I stood with it, unsure of what to do. I mean, I didn't want to get hit, but I also didn't think that I had enough time to get onto my driveway, so I'm just stopped. Then the car stopped directly next to me and a flustered-looking woman got out. Under any other circumstances, I would have thought that she looked kind and trustworthy, but I was already getting a bad feeling in my stomach, so I was sort of freaking out internally. She then told me something along the lines of, "Oh my goodness, I lost my dog. Can you help me find him?" As I already mentioned, my parents were protective, so I had definitely been taught about certain things that people might tell you if they want you to come with them by now. I had also noticed the man who was driving the car, who definitely looked less nice and trustworthy than the woman did, as I mentioned too. Everyone in my town knew everyone, and I didn't recognize either of these people. I had the feeling that something was just very wrong, so I got onto my bike and I just rode like hell up the driveway, but the woman followed me up about halfway. But then she turned and ran back to the car, and said something to the guy. They both drove away, and I was just left in my garage. I never told my parents about this, because I was afraid that they wouldn't let me go over to my friend's house anymore, because it was too dangerous, or something like that. But I had to tell more people about this besides just 2 friends, so I thought that I would share it here with you guys. This happened in the year 2000. I was 21, living with my best friend in a 2-bedroom apartment in a pretty rundown area. Fortunately there was no crime, as it was all too broke. Kids just getting started could afford. I spent my days juggling classes at the local community college, and just working retail. I was single at the time and would often spend my time online all night, just on chat rooms and Usset. I had met this girl too in a local area chat room, and we'd been hitting it off well. So it seemed might email her and we chat on IQ. She had sent me a few pictures, and I was really into her. She was pretty, with a thick curvy body, which was pretty much my type. Her name was Beth and she had told me Beth by Kiss was her favorite song. So this one a night in February, we were talking and she had asked me to come over. She lived a few towns over, maybe an hour away. Like I said earlier, we were hitting it off and honestly I found myself liking Beth a lot, and so I jumped at the chance to actually meet her in person. We made plans for me to pick her up and go to the Waffle House. I showered and got dressed, nothing too fancy, one of those long-sleeve shirts, with a stripe across the chest, jeans hoodie. I didn't want to overdo it, but still looked decent by the time that I left. It was almost 11 and my roommate was asleep in his room. I headed out excited and kind of nervous. In hindsight, though, I really should have just stayed home. It took a lot longer to get there than I thought it would, probably thanks to the rain, but sure enough her directions took me right to her place. It was a double-wide trailer, in a rural area trailer park. I walked up the stairs at the front porch, and I knocked on the door. I've always been pretty shy when talking to girls that I liked, and I was still nervous when she opened the door. The door opened just a little, and a little voice told me to come in. I walked in, apologizing for taking so long. In a little bit of a nervous daze. She said that was okay and to have a seat. So I sat on the couch, and then for the first time, as I looked up and at her, I noticed that was not Beth. This much older woman, maybe in her 40s, wearing only a bathrobe, sat down across from me. Now I don't want to body shame, but I need to point out that she was huge. I'm a big guy over 6'0" with a big hose type body, and she was much bigger than me. I'm a big guy over 6'0" with a big hose type body, and she was much bigger than me. I glanced around trying to figure out what was going on. I saw pictures of the Beth that I knew on the wall, the same pictures that I'd seen during IQ. And hey, who's that guy in the pictures with this older woman? I looked back at her and instantly noticed that she was staring at the clock nervously. I asked what was going on and she started mumbling nervously. Actually, imagine a child telling you what they done when in trouble. That's how she was talking. Like a child caught red-handed. I pieced together that she used the other pictures of a girl around my age. I'm assuming the girl was a niece or something, and in her mumbling, she said that it was later than she realized and he'd be home soon. My mind instantly raced to a friend telling me that his uncle caught his wife using pictures of their daughter to lure younger guys over for anonymous sex. I quickly realized too that the guy in the pictures was her husband, and I was in that very same situation. I fully respect others' relationships, and at this point I was instantly ready to go. I was no longer nervous and I just told her straight up that I wasn't going to mess around with a married woman. I told her to no longer contact me and that I was leaving. I was pretty pissed. I mean, not only had I been lied to, but I'd been cheated on before, and I know exactly what that felt like and refused to have a part in doing that to another person. As I walked out the door onto the porch, she yelled, "Wait." I turned around instinctively to see her coming towards me, and she grabbed me and started trying to kiss me. I pushed her away and I told her to stop, and then her face just turned into a mask of pure insanity, as she rushed towards me once again trying to kiss me. I tried to hold her back, but in a second she tackled me, knocking me over, with her falling on top of me. She kept grabbing at me, grabbing at my private parts, kissing me and crying like a baby. She kept screaming for me to do her, and I was trying to push her off, but the fall had knocked the wind out of me, not to mention, like I said, she was huge. I kept wrestling with her, trying my best, and somehow worked my legs in between us. I pushed them up as hard as I could, knocking her off me, and she stumbled up and fell over on her porch furniture. Adrenaline took over and I just ran, as fast as I could, down the stairs, and straight to my car, as I was sliding into my seat. I saw her picking herself up at the bottom of the stairs. She must have fallen down them trying to get me still, and I backed down the driveway, and as I looked back, before driving away, she was coming down the driveway too. Her bathrobe was hanging half off of her naked body, was exposed and covered with scratches and dirt from her falls and whatnot. I just drove off as fast as my Ford Escort would take me to this day. I still don't know how I didn't get into a wreck from constantly looking in the rearview mirror, hoping that she wasn't following me. But I found my way back to the main road, and before long realized that I had went the wrong way. I pulled into the first gas station intending to turn around. I noticed that nobody was following me and the gas station was well lit and had a few cars in it. I felt safe, and so I parked, trying to get myself together after that insane scuffle, and honestly, I still find it hard to believe just how scared I was. If you would have seen that face and been through that tackle, you'd understand, but I collected myself and I got out of the car to use the bathroom and make sure that I wasn't hurt. The adrenaline was wearing off and random pain started creeping in, and it was then that I noticed that the gas station was uphill, overlooking that trailer park. I could still see her standing at the bottom of the driveway, and it looked like she was holding her head, just crying at first. I kind of felt bad for her. I mean, I'm a nice person to a fault. I've often let myself get sucked into bad situations by feeling bad for a person that I shouldn't have, and I saw this crazy person crying and I just felt bad. But then I remembered all of her crazy stuff and the pain creeping in, making me wonder if she seriously hurt me. So I used the bathroom and I left as I was getting back in my car. I looked back one more time and I saw a car in the driveway and a man was yelling in the front yard. I guess that he must have got home while I was peeing. I can't imagine what it would be like coming home to your wife standing naked in the driveway just crying like that. Judging by her mumbling before the insanity, I figure that she wasn't a good liar either. I got home the next day and told my roommate what happened. I didn't want to at first. I felt ashamed for some reason, though. Like I said, he was my best friend and he knew immediately when something was wrong, not to mention that I was limping around anyway, and my entire body was killing me, and he figured that she was just unhappy in a marriage. And maybe her screwing around made her a little crazy. Or maybe she already was crazy and the situation just set her off. Maybe she was on drugs or something. I don't know, but I cut off all contact, and it's been almost 20 years since that night. I've never seen or heard from Beth again, and I'm 41 now and I'm happily married. My best friend is still my best friend, even though he no longer lives in the state. We never really talk about it, though, outside of this. I've only talked about it to a therapist that I visited during a particular hard time in my life as well. My wife doesn't know, and I still feel pretty ashamed about it. The therapist told me that it was probably a form of a little bit of PTSD type thing or something, not to mention the guilt from perceived gender roles maybe, but who knows. In the end I got away, and I'm thankful for that, but it certainly could have gone a whole lot different. Don't forget to subscribe for more scary adventures.